Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Just waiting a second for this to get set up. All right, here we go. All right, hello, overcomers of the redefined process. Good to be here with you another week, back on our regular schedule. Last week, thank you for bearing with me as I was a day late due to a short vacation. So I appreciated having a couple of comments this week, a couple of questions. Well, one of them, I wasn't sure if it was a question, but I'm going to address it anyway. So, well, first, okay, I'm going to do sort of an announcement first. I want, and I'll touch on this a little bit when I answer my first question here, but I want to make sure, even though there's not many of you in the group at this time, I want to make sure we're really using this group as a place to find support. So if you're struggling with something, if you have a challenge, you can wait and ask me for this call, but you can also put it out there to the community, right? You can post in this group. If you're not getting much of a response, then you can also post in the Women Overcoming Narcissistic Abuse group. All of you are members of that group too. And there's a lot more women in there. So you can post either place, but I really want to start to build this community as a place that you all come for support and come to just sort of hash out and talk through what you're dealing with throughout the week, because the other women here, they understand, what you're going through. Now, I know with the Facebook algorithm and everything, not everybody is going to be getting a notification every time there's a post in this group. So understand that, maybe come check once every day or two to see if there's been any posts. Or also with the algorithm, what I've noticed in the groups that I'm a part of, the more that I participate in those groups, the more that Facebook gives me notifications, okay? So if you kind of play Facebook's game, if you're logging in, if you're posting more to the group, then you're more likely to get notifications when I post or when another group member posts, okay? So I want to just try to make sure that we're using this group well, even though there's a handful of you all in here right now. I still want you to have the benefit of this community, okay? So my question that Debbie had was, saying that she's struggling with strong urges to attach to others and feeling anxious when she's not attached. So of course, this speaks to codependency. And Debbie, I know you're well aware of these tendencies. And I've said before, this awareness is half the battle. Like, it's huge to be aware of these patterns. So I want to sit with that thought for just a minute, and I'm going to talk more about codependency actually on my live that I'm doing in the free group tomorrow morning. That was our topic for this week. So if you listen in on that, you'll get more of my thoughts. But specifically, we're going to address kind of this word attach right now. So if you're aware of that need to attach to others, then that is huge. So, we go through, we have these patterns of the way we relate to others that can be so, it's so subconscious, right? And I've spoken about this elsewhere. I'm not sure if it was here or in my other group. I think it was the other group, about the idea of attachment styles. And so if you're not familiar with what I mean when I say attachment styles, then I want you to go Google that, go look it up on YouTube or just anywhere on the internet. You'll find some really helpful information that I think you can identify with. So just a really brief overview of attachment styles is that this theory of attachment is rooted in childhood, specifically like when we're babies and young toddlers, when we are at the mercy of our caregivers and leaning on them for all of our care, right? Human babies are among the most helpless of baby mammals, right? We need our caregiver. So if your emotional needs were not met as a baby, or if your emotional needs were met inconsistently, then you'd have an insecure type of attachment. Now, if your needs were fully met emotionally, then you have a secure attachment style. So there are some lucky people out there that have a secure attachment style. For most of us who have ended up in abusive relationships as adults, we have one of the types of insecure attachment. So the three main types of the insecure attachment, they can go by some different names, but usually it's anxious attachment, sometimes called ambivalent attachment. There is, on the other end of the spectrum, avoidant attachment. And then in the middle is disorganized, which is kind of a combination of the two. So we'll start with anxious attachment. So anxious attachment, again, either your needs were not met by your caregiver or they were met inconsistently. And so how this shows up in your adult life and in your relationships is that you're always just needy of attachment, right? So that sounds like what Debbie's talking about here. You're always just wanting an attachment figure, someone to care for you, someone to attach to, so you can feel like a whole, safe, and secure person. It's hard to just stand on our own if we have anxious attachment and feel secure and feel safe. We're constantly needing the validation, the attention, the love, and support from other people. And that can get really difficult because in life, once we're past the baby phase, we need to be able to meet some of our emotional needs on our own. And when we can't meet our own emotional needs, that actually becomes really smothering to the other people that we're trying to attach to, because we're trying to get all of our needs met through them. And I've been this person, and I've also been on the other side of it. My last dating relationship was with someone who really could not meet his own needs, and that was exhausting for me. And I had really good boundaries for kind of the first time in my life in a relationship, because I've grown so much, and I was just taking care of myself, and I would offer help for him or whatever. I would, do the things he asked that helped him feel loved. But then at the end of the day, he couldn't hold on to that feeling of being loved, even though I was putting myself out there. I was being honest about my feelings. I was, doing the activities with him that he said helped him feel loved, as far as like his love languages, and but he could only hold on to that sense of feeling loved and secure for like that day. And then like the next day, or sometimes the next hour, he'd be questioning my feelings for him and needing something else, just very needy. And he also, sometimes with anxious attachment, we have trouble voicing our needs. So this goes into the codependency too, we're trying to like care for others kind of as a way to show our love, but also receive love. And we expect the other person to really overextend themselves in return and do so much for us. And if they don't, or when they don't, we can get resentful. So we're not really voicing our needs in a healthy way. We're not communicating that well, and then we get resentful when our needs are not met. But really, even if we did communicate them well, they're probably too great, like I said, that it's going to smother the other person, and they're not going to be able to meet our needs, because we need to be able to show up for ourselves. And that's what this program is largely about, showing up for ourselves and meeting a lot of our own needs. I try to be careful when I talk about that concept of meeting our own emotional needs, because I never want it to sound like, you have to meet all of your needs. You have to be totally self-sufficient and like just this person who doesn't need relationships with anyone, because that's not realistic. But the goal is to have a healthy level of interdependence in our relationship, as opposed to codependence. So codependence is like that anxious kind of attachment where we absolutely need another person to feel safe and secure. Interdependence is, yeah, we need that in the sense that we're relational beings, right? However you believe we were created, we were created as relational humans. We need relationships to be our healthiest selves, right? We need connection and attachment to others, but we shouldn't feel like we're dependent on that constantly and have that feeling of anxiety. I think that's one reason why it's called anxious attachment. We're so unsure and so literally like anxious in our body when we don't have that from other people. We want to be in a place where we can feel okay, but we still desire, of course, attachment and interaction with others. So on the other end of the spectrum from anxious is avoidant. So I always say that I'd probably say all narcissists, my guess, I haven't read any statistics on this or anything, but my assumption is that all narcissists are avoidantly attached. Now, this does not mean that if you're avoidantly attached that you are a narcissist, okay? But all narcissists, I would venture to guess, are avoidantly attached. And what that means, that's probably more like your emotional needs were not met as a child, whereas anxious or disorganized, is like your needs were met maybe inconsistently. Avoidant is your emotional needs were not met. You know, think about the parent who is so absorbed in their own life or just their own trauma, where they're not attentive to the baby when they're crying. And so the baby just learns to sort of stop crying, you know, and then often parents can think, oh, this is a good baby, they don't need much from me, you know, but really that is the child learning that they have to deal with their own feelings, and there's not going to be somebody there to comfort them. So what this looks like in adulthood and even, you know, in early childhood is that that person with the avoidant attachment is actually going to be really uncomfortable with emotional closeness, emotional intimacy. So if you think about the narcissist you've been in a relationship with, this makes sense, right? They, even if they, you know, are all about the, you know, sexual intimacy, physical intimacy with you or with others, really they're not emotionally engaged. That's why, you know, a lot of times those with avoidant attachments and especially narcissists will have affairs. You know, they'll cheat on their partner because it's more, or they'll be addicted to pornography because it feels safer to them to have that physical intimacy with someone else or with a screen versus the person that they're supposed to be emotionally intimate with. So their spouse, you know, there's a whole deep relationship there, right? There are these emotions, and that feels so uncomfortable to them. It makes more sense and feels more comfortable and safer for them to go have sex with a stranger, you know? So, or someone they're not emotionally invested in, someone that it's just a fling, that feels safer to them than the person that they're in that emotional relationship with. So again, that's kind of an extreme example that some narcissists fall into, or a lot of narcissists fall into. But you can be avoidantly attached and not be that extreme, and you don't have to cheat on your spouse because you're avoidantly attached. But you know, I gave that example to demonstrate that, you know, it's they're uncomfortable with emotional intimacy. So, you know, a way that I kind of tend to word it, as far as with my ex-husband, is that the very way that he sought to attach to me was to detach, to distance himself. So, you know, that was where he felt comfortable again, was to be emotionally distant and sometimes even physically distant, to not spend time with me, to sleep in a separate bedroom, to, you know, look at things on his screen, other people, you know, not me. And so that feels right to them. And so if their partner is anxiously attached or disorganized, or just has a healthy, secure attachment and is wanting that emotional intimacy from them, they're going to be very uncomfortable with that. And they might push back or just totally kind of shut down, stonewall, isolate themselves, you know, really withdraw and, you know, hold back affection. Okay. And that's because they feel sort of threatened. That's unsafe. Disorganized attachment is a combination of the two. And this is really the category that I fall more into. So I'll talk a little bit about this and then we'll move on to another topic. But so, well, I'll move on to kind of my tips of how to deal with this and then the next topic. Okay. So with disorganized attachment, your combination of the two, it's that push-pull. Now, the extreme version of this is someone who has borderline personality disorder, where that push-pull is much more, just much more extreme, much more noticeable, right? So you want the attention and the affection and the validation, but at the same time, then it can get to a point where that feels uncomfortable and it's like, oh, it's too close, right? And so I struggle with that push-pull, and I really have to evaluate, you know, in my friendships and in my dating relationships, am I pushing this person away because I really do care about them and want to have that emotional engagement, emotional intimacy with them? And so I always have to check in, you know, am I pushing away? Because I know that can feel horrible to them, and I want to make sure that they're understanding that I really care about them. You know, one way when I was younger in my 20s that I did this was through sarcasm. So people that I cared more about, or someone I just started dating, for example, I would be really sarcastic with them. And this is someone I really cared about, like a new dating relationship in that like infatuation stage, really interested in them, but I would be really sarcastic. And one time I had a friend pull me aside. I so like, you know, maybe stop being so mean, stop being so sarcastic. And I didn't even realize that I was doing it. But in retrospect, I see that was sort of a defense mechanism. And that was the disorganized attachment, where I wanted to be close to that person, but it also felt uncomfortable. So subconsciously that sarcasm was coming out. And so I was pushing him away and keeping him kind of at arm's length. So if you fall in that category, you know, it's just a matter of being aware of, hey, I really want this attachment. So let's make sure that person understands that my behaviors aren't communicating the opposite. Because often, you know, we'll be left thinking like, well, why is this person pulling away? Why don't they understand that I like them? But it's because subconsciously our behaviors and our words, you know, we're pushing them away. So, and it tends to be, you know, if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, chances are you either have the disorganized attachment style or the anxious attachment style. Okay. It'd be unlikely, I think, for two avoidant people to end up together. The good news about this is that these attachment styles are not fixed. So just because that was formed in your early childhood interactions with your caregiver, it doesn't mean that you're doomed to stay in that place. You can grow. So you can grow past this point. You can grow to be more securely attached. I've noticed so much progress in my life in the past several years since my divorce, especially, you know, like I said, in that last dating relationship where I was having healthy boundaries. Now, I still was drawn to someone who seemed to have anxious attachment. That's my guess. You know, who had poor boundaries. So that's something to think through when I first feel attracted to someone. Is it subconsciously, you know, because they have this anxious attachment style or the poor boundaries? But so maybe I didn't choose the healthiest person, but once I was in that relationship, I really saw that I was acting in a much healthier way than I had previously. Now, not perfect, you know, we all have room to learn in each relationship, but I, you know, looking back, I see, you know, I stuck to my boundaries and I didn't feel, although I wanted his attention because I cared about him and it was a new relationship that I was excited about and invested in, I didn't feel like I needed that to feel whole. I felt more secure in myself. And so that leads me to some tips for managing this. So if you're feeling that need to attach and you feel super uncomfortable when you're not, you know, interacting with or attached to a male or, you know, like a romantic partner or to someone else like a friend, then I want you to practice. Now this, gosh, first of all, I know how hard this is. Let me acknowledge that. It's very hard. It feels excruciating at times to not reach out to, especially a romantic interest. You know, that's kind of, it's interesting. That's how it translates into adulthood. It was our caregivers who didn't meet our needs, but now as an adult, it translates into romantic relationships. So that's where this really plays out, is in those intimate partner relationships. So, so I acknowledge that this is hard, but I want to say first, kind of as a way, when you feel that urge coming up to like reach out to someone and you feel like, oh, this is my codependent anxious attachment need to reach out to this person, I want you to stop and feel your feelings. As horrible as that feels, I want you to stop and acknowledge those feelings. I'm definitely a proponent of drawing and journaling to help let these feelings out. Now, a drawing, you all have seen, can be super simple. I mean, I might, here, I'll show you. I hadn't planned on showing you artwork this week, but I'll show. Now, this wasn't about the anxious attachment, but this is, again, just a simple drawing. And I've shown you these before, but I'll show you again. Like I do this regularly throughout the week. I don't do the drawing every day. I do some form of writing every day, which I'll get to in a second. The drawing happens at least a few times a week, though. And so I was focused on a feeling yesterday of focus and being sort of all in, focused on my goals for the day. And so I literally, this might look nicer on the screen than it does in person, honestly. I drew a circle with a Sharpie and then I tried to color it in solid, but the Sharpie was kind of running out, so it looked sketchy. So then I went and got an oil pastel. I literally just took an oil pastel that was blue on its side and filled it in. And then I got an orange and ended up looking brown because the blue and orange mixed together. But I got an orange and added that color in there. And I wrote focus and I wrote all in and I put it's all in there right here. No plan B, in deep. Okay. I was literally just expressing that feeling of focus to sort of solidify it in my mind that, yes, I'm focused today. So I recommend writing down your feelings. I love the circles. You see that a lot of my personal examples, it's in a circle, a mandala design. And so, you know, a circle I think is a great calming, centering container for our feelings. So draw a circle. It can be a piece of scrap paper, the back of junk mail, like whatever. Draw a circle with an ink pen, with whatever you have. If all you have is an ink pen, use that. Draw a circle and fill it in just with some lines. If you have some colors, do colors to represent that feeling. Like, what does that feel like in your body? You may need to stop. You know, I recommend stopping to breathe, do a body scan, like I teach in session 1. You can find all sorts of guided meditations online or on apps to help you focus on your body and breathe. So feel your feelings, that anxious feeling, that panicked feeling in your body of wanting to reach out to someone. Feel that. And then choose an action that you're going to take to attach to yourself instead of to that other person. Okay. So what is something you can do to spend time with you? That might be just the drawing and journaling, the breathing, and the body scan. Literally have a conversation with yourself, either out loud or writing or both. Talk to yourself. Talk to yourself about how you're feeling and what's going on and what you might do. So if you want to take another action after that, just choose something to do that you enjoy. That can be alone or with another person. So first alone, go for a short walk. This could be a 5-minute walk. If you're someone who doesn't exercise much or has physical limitations, choose something that works for you. It might be a 2 to 5-minute walk. It might be, sometimes it feels good to just like stretch my body. I mean, I'm so kind of tense in my body. I've been doing yoga more lately. Return to that practice after a while of not doing it. Sometimes literally just doing this, I'm not trying to show off my tattoos here, but it's just, literally just doing this and making my body big, and sometimes I have to even be careful with that because my back can be so tense. I could like pull a muscle, but just something to show up for yourself. So it can be, I'm going to do like 3 stretches. It could be, I'm going to take a 5-minute walk. It could be, I'm going to treat myself to a dinner and a movie by myself, so it could be a bigger activity or just something really simple in the moment. And again, the drawing and writing is a great way to do that. Or identify a safe person. So if you're wanting to reach out to an ex that you've dated, or certainly someone who is abusive and unhealthy for you, but even if it's just someone you've been involved with romantically in the past, or something, someone, a male or whatever, that you're wanting to attach to like what I'm trying to say is a safe person is someone that you don't feel that panicked need for their attention. Does that make sense? So, if I was wanting to reach out to an ex-boyfriend, after I'd spent that time with myself, it's probably, I know for me, if I'm being honest with myself, that is a function of some insecure attachment going on. Okay. But my friend Suzanne or my friend Colleen, who are good supports to me, they're my closest friends, or maybe calling my sister. She's not in town, but I talk to her on the phone frequently. Calling one of those people or getting together with one of those friends is a safe way for me to feel attached to and connected to another human. But I'm not giving into that just pattern of the anxious or disorganized attachment. Okay. So it's okay to reach out to people, but just make sure it's a safe person, and preferably someone who understands this whole attachment thing that you're dealing with, the codependency, where you can say, hey, and this takes some buildup, maybe a few conversations with them, for them to be the safe person, but someone who understands. Hey, I could say, hey, hey, Suzanne, I'm dealing with that panicked feeling again, where I just need a person and I don't want to overstep my bounds or whatever, but do you have 5 minutes where you could talk to me on the phone? Or, hey, could we go for a short walk together? Because that's going to be more beneficial for me right now than walking alone. I'm just needing another person to attach to. And as long as there's some boundaries set up there, in each individual friendship, you may need to figure out kind of what those boundaries are. And I think, with a good friend who cares about you, if you can explain this to them, they'll be willing to help, figure out those boundaries with you. If they can't do that, then maybe they're not a healthy person themselves and they're not a safe person to work through this with. Okay. But you should be able to, with a close friend or family member, be able to set up what those boundaries look like. So, hey, Suzanne, when I feel this anxious need to be with someone, I'm going to give you a call. And if you can't be with me at that time, let's set a time where you can. And if that needs to be on the phone or taking a walk, and I trust you, Suzanne, to tell me if I'm like being smothering or like freaking you out or whatever with my behavior. Okay. So someone who you can talk through that with. If you don't have someone like that, reach out online in this group or in the other group. If you're needing immediate feedback, I don't always see these posts right away. I'm living my life too. But, the other group certainly is large enough that you could reach out and get somebody pretty quickly to respond in some way, even if it's just a like or a heart, somebody's there, right? So that's kind of a last resort, that online there are people there. Okay, so I hope that's helpful, and so in the reviewing action steps, in the moment when you're feeling this anxious need to attach, stop and feel your feelings. I recommend drawing, writing, breathing, stretching, moving your body. And then thinking of an action step you can take of something to do with yourself to further talk to yourself and attach to yourself. And then third, if you really need to be with another person, that's okay. Make sure it's a healthy, safe relationship to do that with, where you guys have already discussed the boundaries and what's going on there. And so through taking those steps, this is what I want to emphasize and wrap up this point, or this whole topic of attachment, is that every time we take a step to attach to ourselves, to show up for ourselves instead of reaching out to the other person, we are attaching to us. And gradually over time, that is what heals our insecure attachment. Okay. So I said it's possible to heal from this. This is how. It's those little bitty steps. I'm going to talk again in a minute about little steps. So those daily steps every day, showing up for us and resisting that urge to reach out in an unhealthy way to others, to attach to them, and attaching to ourselves instead, that's what heals the insecure attachment over time. Okay. And that's what I've noticed for me, consistently. I even had a friend at one point who was my accountability for this. There was a particular man that I kept wanting to text or call. We were no longer dating, we were just friends. But I could tell the difference between, oh, I wonder how he's doing, I'll just reach out to him, and I need some attention or validation, and I know he tends to text back quickly, so he's going to be my go-to. There's a big difference between those two. So I actually had another female friend who was accountability, who I would call or text when I was wanting to text this guy and just tell her, hey, I'm wanting to do this, I'm trying to resist it. And she would say, all right, Jennifer, don't do it. And I would have to stop, feel those excruciating feelings, and then sit with them for a minute, and then move on and do something for myself. Okay, so I've experienced that. That's one of the ways that I've grown in this area. The other comment that I had was that life seems to be, sorry, I was checking to make sure there were more comments in the Facebook group. So life feels like, or seems like, life is swirling around me. And then my day goes by too fast, and there's not time for the art therapy. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say, if you weren't intending for me to address this, you were just making a statement, Denise, then that's fine. And I just want to say, give yourself grace. Okay. Sometimes life is busy. We have a few women who started this program strong who have taken a step back. A couple of them have articulated that to me, like, hey, during this phase, I'm really busy, and I'm going to pick back up with the redefined process when I have time. Okay. So if you see silent members in the group, that's why. They might not necessarily be finished with the content, but they're just needing to take a step back because work picked up, a lot of things after COVID. Our life is changing and getting busier, and we're sort of recalibrating, we're recalibrating to regular life again, or what our new normal is. So that's fine if you need to take a few days or a week or two to step back from this practice, because I know, especially with this program, and especially with sessions 1 through 8, it's going to be around an hour, at least an hour that you're going to sit down to do one session. And that's a lot, to schedule that time. Okay. So I realize that's a lot. So give yourself grace. You can take a day or week off. If you're still engaging here in the group, listening to this, because this is easier to consume, right? Like, you could listen to a coaching call or something, or listen to one of my, videos or things in the other group, and you can passively consume that. That can be easier to do, like while you're cooking dinner or while you're driving to work or whatever, than sitting down and having that hour chunk of time to yourself. So I get that. So continue to be engaged in whatever way is easier for you to consume. Okay. It's just easier to consume information and actually take that action. So give yourself grace. But second, a way to sort of challenge yourself to set that time aside for yourself is to really embrace this idea that you do have control over your day. So again, some days are just busy. So that's a separate thought. Some days, some weeks, some months are just really busy, and there's just not that time. Okay. So we get that. That's a separate thought. Want to move on to, there also another way to look at this, or another option, is that sometimes our days feel out of our control, but we really have more control than we think. I saw somebody post about this online just yesterday. in the context of, you know, if you're having a bad day, what can you do to change that into a good day? Like, just because you start a day out, you know, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or it starts busy, or something horrible happens in the morning, it doesn't mean it's a bad day. Like, you have control over the rest of the day from that point forward. You can choose something, like I said before, to write, to draw, to take a walk, to reach out to a close, safe friend. You can make a choice to make that day better. So similar idea here, that if you're feeling like, oh, my day is just swirling out of control, sit down and consider, you know, what you do have control over. Okay. So, you know, sometimes we have to kind of reverse engineer, like backtrack and think like, okay, looking back over my day, this, and this happened, and this is how I felt as a result. So starting with the first moment of the day, what could I have done differently? And so not a guilt trip, and not to say everything stressful or bad or busy that happened in your day was like your fault, but just, you know, like, for example, this morning I was a little scattered, more so than usual. And I can attribute that to the fact that I got less sleep, not just last night, but the past few nights, because I've stayed up later. Okay. So I don't have to beat myself up about that, but I can own that that's why I felt more scattered, and less in control at the beginning of my day, because I'm tired. Okay. But again, you know, I can stop and say, but I can shift from this point forward. I can do some meditation, do something that's going to help me focus. Okay. Do some journaling. I did all that this morning, and I'm more focused as a result. All right. It didn't run perfectly. You know, I had some interruptions. I was at home doing the meditation, did some short yoga this morning. My daughter interrupted it, but I breathed and responded appropriately to her, didn't like yell at her or anything, and got back to what I was doing. And I was able to finish my morning routine the way I wanted it to. Well, complete all of the things I wanted to do, the self-care tasks. And then some of it, the journaling, I had to wait, you know, until I got to work, but that's always sort of my backup plan. So I took control over it, even though it started out kind of rocky and tired. Still a little unfocused when I got to work, but I did more things to help me get focused. Okay. So consider, like, just backtrack and think about what you do have control over, and those tiny mini wins. I think it's a win. It's like a micro win. If you can, first of all, just recognize like one thing you have control over. So if tomorrow you just get a little more sleep, or you fit in, you know, 2 minutes of journaling, and you wanted to do the redefined process tasks the next session, but you couldn't fit that in, you know, at least you did the 2 minutes of journaling, right? So it's a micro win, and all of that adds up to bigger wins, to bigger success, to meeting our goals. So, you know, a goal for you right now, if you're not finding the time or figuring out the time to fit in your art time for the redefined process, you know, maybe a goal is to work towards that, but what can you do on the way? So it's not, I'll kind of wrap up here in a minute, but so I think this might help explain this to you about the micro wins. So if my ultimate goal is to be able to sit down for an hour and do, you know, the session 3 tasks for the redefined process, then I don't reach that goal by every day of the week saying, okay, I'm going to do it today. And then the next day, okay, I'm going to do it today. Next day, all right, I didn't do it the last 2 days. I feel really shitty about myself, but okay, I'm going to do it today. You might get to your goal like that. I hope you can by just saying, I'm going to do it. But if this is really a struggle, it's likely that that's not going to help you. So what is going to, because like the root of the issue is your day is getting out of your control. It could be poor scheduling. It could be things are just busy. It could be you just feel a lack of control. So you're not like scheduling that time well. But the way you're going to get to that bigger goal of being able to schedule that whole hour or so to do the redefined process task is through practicing putting in little goals, little time goals into your schedule. Okay. So it's incremental, if that makes sense. So it might be 2 minutes of journaling before bed tonight. Okay. I did those 2 minutes. It might be a full week or two of doing those 2 minutes of journaling. And then you're like, okay, I see what this feels like. I see what it feels like in my body to feel in control and to celebrate those micro wins, those little wins that I did 2 minutes of journaling today. Like holy cow, I did 2 minutes of journaling versus nothing for several days. That's a big deal. So celebrate that. See what that feels like in your body versus my day is swirling away from me. I don't feel in control of it. See what that feels like to win at something little and like, okay, I had control over those 2 minutes before bedtime. I made that time. Like, yay me, like, yay Jennifer, yay Denise for making that time. Like, good job, me. I scheduled that. I see what it feels like to schedule something and to accomplish it. And now my day feels a little more in control. And then you can up that incrementally. Again, if time is the issue here, up that goal daily until you reach a day where you can do the full hour session. Maybe it just takes that small micro win for a few days before you can do the hour. It's just an example I was giving. But let me know if this makes sense to you or if you need me to clarify more, okay? I can clarify more later or next week if need be. But yeah, let's think of little ways you can take control of your day. So I hope that makes sense, that by incrementally experiencing those wins and what it feels like to have control, that's going to help you inch towards your goal more so than just every day I'm going to set the big goal of having that hour. I don't have an hour of self-care time every day. So even though you're not one to do the session every day, if you're setting that goal every day, like, well, today I'm going to do it, today I'm going to do it. I mean, chances are, if time's an issue, you're not going to reach it. So I'm repeating myself, but small goals to get you there. Practice feeling in control of your day and your schedule. All right. I hope this was helpful for you all. My goal is to make it really cater to what you all are dealing with and your questions and challenges. So I really appreciated having those comments this week. I can keep thinking of topics to talk about, but honestly, I've gotten to where I'm really saving those for my monthly teaching times, which, by the way, I have not yet set the date for that. Probably tomorrow or Saturday. I'm going to be working Saturday morning. I will put out the Facebook event for that next teaching time. So I did July 17th, I believe, was 45-minute teaching of the next advanced session material that is now posted in the group in the membership site, the Redefined Process site. And later this month, I will have another one. So there's that new, so you can attend live, but then it's also added as new content to the membership site. All right. And just as a reminder, all of those advanced sessions, if you want to skip ahead and do those, you can. I've designed it to be about kind of integrating the Redefined Process into your daily life after you finish the first 8 sessions. But if you've done at least the first session and have kind of a working idea of the process here, then you could go ahead and do one of those advanced sessions if that feels good to you, because they really are. I mean, the first 2 so far are really similar in a lot of ways to the scribble drawing. That's something that we're building on. The scribble drawing, is really the most open-ended kind of spontaneous drawing that we do in the first 8 sessions. And so that's why I keep referring back to it in the advanced sessions, because the goal in the advanced sessions is that you're going to be doing just spontaneous, just what you want to do. Okay. So those advanced sessions really build on session 1. So if you're curious about those, if you have the time, you could explore one of those at any point in the process. But just know that you probably get the most benefit out of it after you've gone through the whole 8 sessions. All right. But either way is fine. And whatever you're doing, the advanced sessions, the beginning ones, if you're repeating session 1 over and over again. So one last side note. So a way to incorporate some of this kind of daily self-care daily goal is, Denise, if you're struggling with finding the time to sit down and do the whole next session 3 or whatever one you're on, maybe it's just doing a short scribble drawing, like you did in session 1. So that's still time for your art. It's still time for that therapeutic process. I don't call it art therapy here because we're not doing therapy, but it's when you're by yourself, you're not doing therapy with yourself, but it's like art as therapy. It's a therapeutic art experience. So that therapeutic art experience with yourself, that could be like 2 minutes. It could be like that 2-minute journaling that I use as an example at the end of the day before you go to bed. So if you're not finding time for that whole next session, maybe just a daily practice or a few times a week practice of doing a short scribble drawing to show your feelings. Okay. So it can be a small thing. All right. Just a side note I should have mentioned earlier, but just want to make sure you all are getting that we can go back to previous sessions, especially session 1, and just repeat that as long as you need to. Okay. There's no rush to get through this. We go through it at the pace that we go through it, right? Like, even if you had like 8 days of vacation in a row to just do one of those sessions every single day, you probably wouldn't have the same sort of progress that you'd have if you space it out once every week or 2, right? Because it's a lot to process. It's a lot to kind of put in your brain and put into action in your life, especially with setting the goals. So no rush, take it at your own pace, but at the same time, it's like give yourself grace, but at the same time, challenge yourself to be moving forward in some small incremental steps. All right. Have a good rest of your week and weekend. I'll see you in the Facebook group. Would love to see you all interacting more in there. All right.